Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. It's long overdue that I'm recording a best opening idea of a month series, and today is the day where we finally have a new episode, and I'm really excited to be able to show you many interesting opening ideas which have been played in the span of, I think it was like March upwards until now. So yeah, there have been many interesting ideas, many high-level tournaments. For example, the European Chess Championship is one event where we're going to take a closer look at, and I went, as usual, went through all of the games, and yeah, this is kind of my selection of what is the most interesting when it comes to the opening. So the first thing we're going to have a look at is one system which was played actually by two French players. One of them, Nihal Sarin, played in the European Chess Championship against Maxim Chigaev, and the funny story is I was actually sitting next to him, and he made a totally easy draw with the black pieces. Nihal Sarin against Chigaev, who is a very, very strong player, especially with the white pieces. So this is a very interesting system we're going to have a look at now. So what am I talking about? It's this quite classical position of the Queen's Gambit, and here Nihal played the move Knight c6, which looks kind of like a beginner's move. I would say usually everyone is taught the knight doesn't belong on c6 because it blocks the c7 pawn, and also you kind of lose control of this pawn on d5. But in fact, it's actually not so easy to make use of that. And yeah, as I discussed in the game between Nihal and Chigaev, he managed to very easily equalize. So after knight c6, the idea in general is to follow it up with knight f6. And then often if white keeps the pressure here to take on c4, and then we're going to have some sort of Rogozin type of position. So knight f3, I think, is the move that is played by almost everyone. If they take on d5 after e takes d5, now it might even be a small bonus that the knight is not on f6 yet. Still, in this Carlsbad position with the knight on with the knight on c6, it might be a little bit problematic. But also black does have some other ideas to play completely different. So I think this is not a problem, like not as much of a problem as the main move knight f3, which is mostly played. And now my Nihal's idea was to simply go knight f6, and here we're going to go through a couple of options which white has. So I already said cd5 is an option, especially now it makes a lot of sense since black has already committed to knight f6, and after e takes d5 to go bishop g5. Again, it looks totally ridiculous to play such sort of position, and I also do think that this is probably the best way for white to proceed. It's probably the simplest way, and white does get probably some sort of favorable version of the Carlsbad structure, but still it's not entirely easy, and it's certainly playable for black. So what I analyzed was bishop e7, e3, short castle, bishop d3, and now the idea after h6, bishop h4 to go knight e8. And now if white takes on e7 after knight e7, we got a totally acceptable Carlsbad all of a sudden, because the knight is now very, very reasonable on e7, and this knight from e8 can come to this desired d6 square, possibly followed by bishop f5, exchanging bishops. Of course, c6 first would also make sense, but here I don't really see the problems for black. Bishop g3 might be a better try. And here bishop d6, there is probably not much better than to offer this move repetition here, at least as far as I could tell. So white could probably repeat here. That would be one downside. And if short castle, for example, now again the same idea with knight e7, which at least looks quite playable. So cd5, if you're encountering this with white, is probably the easiest choice to get quite a simple game with white, but it's still not a huge problem for black. So it's certainly playable. Instead, bishop g5 also looks quite logical. Here I analyzed the move d takes c4, which now the second French player comes into play, who is Joseph Guérel. And as far as I know, those two were quite good friends, so I think they worked out this whole line together. dc4 is the idea, and black will do anything to hold on to this pawn on c4. So after e3, now knight a5 is the idea, which was also played by Joseph Guérel, actually in the same tournament, also in the European Chess Championship against Mats Andersen. If e4, then this knight a5 doesn't work so well because white already has some ideas with e5 later on. So after e4, then h6 is the point, and now white has weakened this d4 pawn a little bit. After takes, bishop c4, there are a couple of ideas. g5 is even an idea to threaten g4 on the next move, but bishop d7 is probably a more solid option, possibly even followed by long castle, when again the position is totally playable. e3 is probably the most critical move. Now knight a5, as I mentioned before. Knight e5, perhaps the most logical. It was played by Mats Andersen at least. If queen a4 checks, c6, there are intense intense complications happening after b4, which is not even a top engine move, I believe. But it seemed quite logical to me, since after cb, ab, this knight on a5 is almost trapped. This is quite bad, but black is holding everything together with queen b6. If you're interested in playing this, definitely check out this line a bit more, since it's extremely complicated and quite important. Knight e5 was played by Anderson, and now a6 is the point. So white will win back that pawn, but he did lose a lot of time also trying to regain it. Anderson took on c4 with the knight, which is, again, probably the most logical by far. But after takes, c5, actually black doesn't really have any problems whatsoever. Seems like Queen's Gambit accepted with those knights being exchanged. This knight, which is usually an f3, and this knight, which is either on b8 or on c6. So the game continued dc5, bishop c5, and yeah, something like that, when black didn't really have any problems and held a draw. Bishop c4 is probably better objectively, but after takes, bishop e7, we got definitely a playable position as well. Maybe white is a little bit better. He got the space advantage, but also black does have some ideas with fianchettoing his bishop on the queen side if white doesn't allow that by going queen f3 at some point. So after castle h6, bishop h4, yeah, position is a little bit better, but certainly playable for black. You can also try to get c5 in at some point. So if even white finds all of this, like bishop c4 is not really an easy move to make, just giving up the bishop pair like this. So this is bishop g5. Again, dc4 is the idea. Apart from that, e3 I felt like is also quite logical. And here I guess that dc could be a move, but in general what black wants to do is to go bishop d6. And now if this bishop moves, then black takes. And now all of a sudden black has actually a very comfortable position. This typical break with d5, which we often see in the Rogozin as well. And yeah, black has no problems whatsoever. I might even take the black pieces here in this position already. Seems very easy to play. So bishop d3 is not so good. White could try and wait with moves like a3 as well, but after short castle next from black, it will probably be hard to find any more that useful moves apart from developing this bishop at some point. c5 is another move to think about here. And now bishop e7, bishop b5. In general, black here has, I would say, two ideas. The first one is to set up some sort of stonewall with knight e4 followed by f5. And another idea is, a more solid idea perhaps, is to try and break with b6 and just undermine this pawn structure for white. If bishop b5, it's important to go bishop d7 and not allow white to ruin this structure here with bishop c6. That would look pretty bad for black. So bishop d7, and then again castle, and black will try probably in this case to go for this plan with b6. And even objectively here, it's not really a big issue for black. A3 was the move which was played by Chigaev, and I was amazed how well prepared Nihal was in this game. He blitzed out knight e4, and all of a sudden, we will see soon, there's actually quite a nice trick here, which white could run into. Queen c2 was a move played by Chigaev, which I would also say is maybe the most logical. e3 also makes a lot of sense here. Knight takes e4, by the way, is bad because of the e4, and then on the next move, black will simply pick up the pawn on d4. E3 doesn't make a lot of sense, and here I assume that Nihal's idea was to take on c3 and go knight a5. This is at least one of the top choices by the computer, and now black is forcing white to make a decision with his pawn, which probably he's going to take cd, ed, and again, quite a typical structure in the Queen's Gambit, but this knight on a5 now at least makes sense. Like knight c6, we have seen worse positions where this knight didn't make a lot of sense. But here on a5, the knight controls this valuable c4 square and also doesn't allow white to push c4 himself at some point. For example, bishop d3, bishop d6, short castle, short castle here. Even f5 was an option which the computer suggested, but it does look a little bit weakening. So short castle, and now white already had to go for e4 to try and play for an edge. And all of a sudden, actually, we have sort of a Petrov structure here with those pawn islands. This is quite typical from the Petrov as well. So long-term speaking, black already has an advantage, you could say, because he has the better pawn structure. But of course, these pawns can also be quite dangerous in the middle game if white starts pushing them. Bishop g4 was the move I analyzed here, and after h3, bishop h5, position just seemed playable. This is how the line went, in case you're curious. Queen c2, bishop g6, takes. Even fg is an idea sometimes. But here, yeah, I don't know, rook f3, of course, is one idea, but it also does weaken black's king and also the e5 square, so I didn't really like it here. hg6 is quite solid, and if c4, queen d7, followed by b6. when again the position is just playable. If white goes c5, it also has the downside that after the bishop moves, this square on d5 becomes weakened, so white already has to kind of make a decision on how to proceed with those pawns, because yeah, pawns cannot move backwards, and sometimes it can be a decision which he will later on regret. So yeah, this is not that much of a problem, I think, e3, because of taking a knight a5. But let's go back to the game, which was queen c2. And here Nihal took on c3, queen takes c3, and now a5. So if some of you have been wondering where actually is the trick here, you can take a pause here. How could white blunder? In fact, it is e3, which is kind of a very logical move, but it loses immediately because of bishop b4, which is a very nice trick. And if a b4, which is forced, a b4, now we can see that the queen is attacked and the rook on a1 is attacked as well, and white cannot protect the rook. So he has to probably give the queen, rook a8, bc, and black is simply up a queen for only a minor piece and the rook, and is winning in this case. So e3 already quite a nice blunder if we face it. Bishop f4 was played by Chigaev, which is also quite logical, and here Nihal took on c4, which you have to know these moves, otherwise maybe it's not so easy to find all of this over the board. But later on it actually makes some sense. Like black again is giving up a central pawn and activates white's queen, but after bishop d6, then I realized when I was watching the game, it actually does make some sense. So bishop d6, and here Chigaev played bishop g3. If bishop takes d6, black can just recapture cd when already he has no problems whatsoever. If e3, queen b6, this pawn on a5 can actually also be quite an asset sometimes if you get a4 and knight a5 and clamp down these pawns on the queen side. So here black already doesn't really have any issues, just short castle, bishop d7 and some rook to c8, and yeah, black doesn't really have any problems. So Chigaev played bishop g3, and now Nihal again blitzed out the move h5, so he wants to force white to take on d6. That's kind of the plan, which then sort of repairs his pawn structure and also gives him some play later on to push for e5. Chigaev here played the move e4, which I think already was sort of an inaccuracy. I think that white should go for the move e3 here, which at least is the top choice by the computer. And after h4, again, the only way really to try and exert some pressure, objectively speaking, is bishop e5, which I really have my doubts that anyone would play this over the board, especially if they don't know it, which yeah, it's kind of clear that, I mean, no one will know this line because it's simply so rare. I think there are no games here, as you can see. One exact game, and Sarana actually played bishop e5, so probably he did know this. Bishop e5 was played by Sarana, and f6 I think was the game how it went, which is not a good move. Black does have to take on e5. He has two options, bishop e5 or knight takes e5. After knight takes e5 here, I don't really like the position so much because white even has some ideas to put the rook to d1, even castle long. This looks quite dangerous, but bishop takes e5 seemed quite interesting. And if d takes e5, now queen d5. Because now also the pawn on e5 actually is sort of attacked sometimes and can become a weakness. And white probably should even leave the queens on the board, since in the end game, white's pawn structure actually could be an issue. Also, the pawn on e5 can be attacked by moves like rook h5 later on, if an end game comes, like something like this, for example, when rook h5 could be an idea. That's what I was saying. Queen f4 is the best engine line here, and now a4 was one idea to get queen a5. For those of you interested, again, this is how my analysis went, knight e7 and knight g6. This was important to kick out the queen to get long castle, and we just have a total mess here in this position. Also, white had to make some only moves even at some point to even get some sort of advantage, and even the position we get in the end is fully playable. So I definitely think we can live with that. If h4, yeah, I think bishop e5 is not so logical in general. I mean, the idea is if f6, then he's going to take, and then this f6 move is sort of weakening in this case. But I think bishop d6 is probably more logical. And now cd6, and again, this pawn on h4 is actually pretty useful. One example line, bishop e2, and now h3. And now this pawn on h3, of course, can be a weakness sometimes, but it also clamps down white's king side, and the king can become a bit weak sometimes. For example, castle, bishop d7, rook c1, and queen f6 was my analysis. And black has ideas to break out with e5 when already bishop g4 could be quite unpleasant. So yeah, back to the game. Chigaev played e4, and after h4 now he took cd6 and d5, and now actually yeah, the game continued e5, e5, queen e7 check, and after queen e2 check I offered a draw, which Nihal accepted after a long think. But it turns out that black actually already has quite a comfortable position. If knight e5, for example, is probably the best move here, takes queen takes e5. I mean, the position is probably a draw here, but because of this pawn on d5, which is on a light square, black definitely has some play left here to try and squeeze out an advantage. King could come to d8 or even to f6, and yeah, the pawn on d5 will be somehow hopefully attacked like a rook on c5, for example. So black is probably a little bit better here, but yeah, the tournament was long, so it was maybe a strategical decision by Nihal, who was also playing against a very strong opponent, to accept the draw here. But of course, a huge opening success for black in this case, who played, you could say, kind of a dubious line, but very, very easily equalized, even got slightly better position. Yeah, if e4, bishop d6, cd6, I think that was all. Yeah, bishop e2 here was also one move, but if h3, now again, g3 short castle, we have a similar position to before, just that the pawn is on e4. And if short castle, I didn't continue checking this, but even e5 could be an idea now, once again, with bishop g4 to come. Again, this pawn on h3 is actually quite annoying for white, because if the bishop comes to g4, white can also never kick it out with h3. So yeah, this was the first idea, totally new territory, I would dare to say, but definitely interesting. And I would honestly even think about playing this myself in some future games, since if it was possible for Nihal to have such a good game against Chigaev, then yeah, why shouldn't I try it? And I hope some of you guys might also have found this interesting. So yeah, let's hop on to the next idea. The next opening idea was also from the European Chess Championship, and it was played by Luca Moroni against Henry Edward Tudor. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. A young prodigy from Romania. And in this game, Moroni actually showed a very nice idea with the white pieces, which I didn't ever see in that context. So he played c4, the English opening, knight f6, knight c3, c5, g3, and d5. C takes d5, knight takes d5, bishop g2, knight c7, and here is the starting position for us, where Luca played the move f4, which is not a totally new idea. I have seen these sorts of ideas in other positions, but in this exact position, I think I've never seen it before. And the idea is white is stopping black from going e5. And the other idea is, if black always goes knight c6, then this bishop can take bc6, knight f3, when this pawn on f4 is also actually quite an asset for white. And black has these problems with those doubled pawns, and this position is already quite annoying with queen a4 to come. In general, you could say f4 is a little bit of a weakening move, but in this scenario, often if you give up this bishop, actually this move f4 can even be a benefit, because, well, you've given up the bishop, so anyway, it doesn't really matter anymore what you do on the king side, but this move f4 at least clamps down the black center, so he cannot get e5, and it also takes some key squares away. So often if you give up this bishop, this fianchetted bishop, you want to follow it up by going f4. So yeah, this is already slightly more pleasant for white. After f4, there are a couple of moves. I think either g6 or e6 make the most amount of sense. I would even argue that g6 here is more sensible, which was also chosen by Henry Edward Tudor. But before we go there, I wanted to show you one other variation which has a similar idea, which I've seen before. So how those ideas can be applied in different openings is always quite interesting. So this is from this sort of English, and here there is the move f5, which is also very rare, so this is an opening idea by itself. Here it's not so great, because, well, black is a tempo down, and yeah, here white probably has an advantage somehow, but it's still sort of a funny idea, because white cannot take because of queen a5, picking up the knight, which is already a nice trick on its own, and otherwise, white is just avoiding e4. That's kind of the main idea. And if g3, g6, this is sort of a position which white can get. And now white has the choice to go e3, guarding the knight. If knight c2, again, we could see some ideas with black waiting with the development of the knight, then to get knight c3, and then the bishop could take on c3, as we will see in the idea I'm going to show. So yeah, this position, of course, is very similar, basically with just with colors reversed. So I thought it's interesting to show those similarities. So g6 was played by Henry Edward Tudor. e6 here will also be answered probably by the move b3, and then followed by queenside fianchetto as well, as also in the main line, which we're going to go to. Short castle, queen c2, and in general I was a little bit surprised that white actually has very dangerous attacking chances, often connected with knight f3, even h4, and then knight g5, which is quite a nice idea here. Again, if knight c6, black does have the option to take, white does have the option to take and go knight f3. Again, with those doubled pawns, and the bishop on c8 is also doesn't do anything at all. I cannot even be activated on this diagonal anymore. And if knight d5, knight f3, knight c6, rook c1 was my analysis. b6 and now h4 with just a total mess to come, knight g5, and white does have some attack. Of course, black is still sort of solid, but it already looks a little bit dangerous. For those of you who are interested, this was the line I was checking a little bit, h6, e3, knight f5, knight f2, when it's just a total mess. Black can never really take here because of the hg. This bishop is just a monster, especially in combination with the rook. Already rook h8 is threatened, and if f6, I guess this knight will just somehow join the game again. It just looks very, very dangerous for black. Yeah, this line. Again, I don't think e6 is such a logical move. I would say that you're mostly going to get g6 in tournament practice. But after e6, there is one nice understanding which I wanted to show. The computer suggested this move h4, and I thought, yeah, why not just try it? And I was trying to understand the idea what happens if black goes h5, and the h5 is actually a huge strategical mistake, you could say. We will see a similar idea later on in the video with a4, which is provoking a5. So we're going to get to that later with the Adam Kozak game. And this is actually sort of the same idea. So if black stops this pawn advance here, it's actually a big strategical mistake, because now black will have a hard time castling short. If he castles short now, there's always e3, pawn is attacked on h5, and if g6, g4. And white has a devastating attack here, basically. Even if black takes this pawn, the king will just move somewhere, and all these lines will just open up, and yeah, black will have a very hard time. So yeah, the problem after h4, of course, is that black doesn't have to go h5. Bishop e7 is quite good, and after h5, then only to stop h6 by going h6 himself, when now white didn't really achieve anything much, I would say. So here I would go for b3 as well, but I thought it's interesting to point out this idea with h4 as well. Yeah, g6 was how the game proceeded. Now white went for b3, bishop g7, bishop b2, short castle, and now again the waiting game sort of continues, queen c1. So again, we see the idea, if black goes knight c6, you want to take and have knight a4, when black already has quite a lot to think about on how to defend the pawn on c5. And yeah, otherwise queen c1 is sort of a logical move, already defending the bishop on b2 and sometimes getting ready to move the knight somewhere. So yeah, black probably shouldn't play knight c6 here yet. Other ideas are knight d7 or e5. Knight d7 was played in the game, which is quite a good move. And yeah, by the way, if knight f3 here, I mean, that's the whole idea. If you go knight f3 now, black will be sort of happy and can finally develop his knight to c6 without needing to worry about bishop c6. So yeah, after queen c1, knight d7 was played in the game. If e5 takes, knight f3, bishop g7, knight e4 seems playable here. There was no objective advantage, but after black has to go b6, I guess at some point white is going to castle, and there is still some pressure along this diagonal. I mean, for now, black can defend against this with f6, but still there will be some tricks at least along this diagonal. So just with a playable position here after knight e4. Knight d7 was played in the game. Henry Edward Tudor, by the way, reacted very well against this idea. I'm not sure I would have reacted as well as he did in the game. Now Luca played knight e4, again with the idea just to exchange this active bishop on g7, bishop takes b2, queen takes b2, and here Henry went for b6, and Luca followed it up quite nicely by going h4, bishop b7 and h5, and Luca had quite a nice attack and won a pretty good game later on. Definitely check it out if you're interested in playing that line. I think it was quite instructive. By the way, again, if black goes h5, trying to stop that, g4 again works, giving up a pawn and then opening up the h file for the rook, again with a very, very dangerous attack. Yeah, b6 was the move played. I saw that the top choice by the computer was rook b8, which yeah does not strike me as being so so human. Maybe trying to prepare b6, but yeah, h4 again seems like a nice idea. And if h5 g4 h6, g4, h5, again with just a total mess, but it's certainly white that has some attacking chances here. So those ideas connected with the h4 will always be important in this line, especially after exchanging this bishop on g7. So yeah, this idea with f4 is interesting, definitely to add something to your repertoire, especially if you play the English. Hope you found value in this line as well, and perhaps if you don't play the English with white but with black, then this line could be something to look into. So let's go to the next idea. So this opening idea is probably, I'm going to give you a spoiler, one of my favorites at least, and anyway, one of the best ideas I've seen in a very long time in general. It's nothing like which is going for an immediate attack and trying to checkmate your opponent, but it's such a very nice strategical or positional trap, you could call it. So the game I'm referring to is Adam Kozak, who is a very good friend of mine, a grandmaster from Hungary, who's also my age. He's rated around 2600, so a very, very strong player. And in this game in specific, he showed a very nice preparation. So we're talking about the line knight f3, d5, and b3. And now his opponent went for bishop g4. But in this chapter of the video, I want to give you in general sort of an overview in this b3 line and sort of try to give you a repertoire, some directions here, since I saw that after the move bishop f5, there have also been some interesting developments lately. But let's go to the idea which Adam Kozak showed in the game, which was after bishop g4. By the way, his opponent, if I didn't mention it, was Miloš Spar, who is also around our age and a strong international master from Poland. So Miloš played bishop g4, now e3. Otherwise, if white goes bishop b2, it does give black the extra option to take on f3, which you don't have to allow if you go e3. And Miloš played knight d7 and now bishop b2. There are, I have to give you a warning, there are so many different move orders in this line, and some of them have some drawbacks and some upsides as well. Perfect example for this is knight d7 has one advantage, but also one disadvantage, as we will see. e6, bishop b2, knight f6. So that's one move order if black doesn't go for knight d7. But whenever black commits to going knight f6, now the key point is that after h3 or bishop e2, knight d7, that white has ideas to pick up the bishop with knight h4. I'm going to give you an example. If bishop e2, now knight bd7, h3, bishop f5 here, for example, now knight h4 would be possible. Or if bishop h5, g4, and then knight h4 would also be possible because the knight is already on f6 and the queen doesn't guard the h4 square. So this is one reason why I think Miloš might have not developed the knight to f6 yet. Bishop b2, e6 was played, and here Adam went for d3, which, you're going to laugh at me. I mean, it looks like such a ridiculous setup, not trying to put any pressure on white. But Adam had a very, very interesting idea, which we're going to get to soon. So the point is, white is going to develop with knight bd2 next. Miloš played h6 with the idea that whenever h3 comes, bishop f5, the bishop can go to h7 back. If white manages to get this bishop, then at least he can argue that he has the bishop pair and perhaps has a small long-term advantage. For example, if knight f6, knight bd2, and if he develops the bishop to e7, then there would be this idea with knight h4 here, picking up the bishop, and white probably has some advantage. There are even some ideas to try to trap the knight on h5 here, for example. If rook g1, then knight h4 with the idea of bishop e2 and then bishop takes h5, which is also something which is quite nice to see, to have seen before. Also, knight h4 is, of course, one idea to pick up the bishop on g6, but here this line with g5 also works pretty well for black. If black goes h6 with this move order, we are back in the game. So Miloš started by going h6 right away. Adam went knight bd2, knight f6, and now bishop e2. Black played bishop e7, and now comes the absolutely fantastic idea, which is the move a4. So you're going to be asking, what exactly is the point of this move? And black actually ran right into the trap, which I think that 99% of players are going to do. So it's quite obvious that white wants to go a5 and then possibly even a6 when black has to make some concession, otherwise take, ruining his pawn structure, or to go b6 when the c6 square also becomes weakened. So I guess that most players are just going to think, I'm going to stop this and go a5, which also black totally understandably did in the game. But now white went for the move knight to d4. And he's forcing the exchange on e2, and you're not gonna believe it, but this position is actually already, even objectively, quite dangerous for black. The computer gives an advantage of like 0.5, 0.6, sometimes even. And now the whole point of this inclusion is that black can never comfortably go c5 anymore because white has moved knight b5. When this knight on b5 is just an absolute monster and black's position is sort of in strategical shambles here. So yeah, a5 is the move which black shouldn't do. It was in the game, just as a brief reference. Black continued with c6. The game actually later on ended in a draw, but white had an overwhelming position. He played f4, queen c7, and even g4. And he went for long castle and then some initiative on the king side. White has a huge advantage already here. Another point would be just to continue with short castle. This is also what is suggested by the computer, and then either to continue with e4 ideas or c4, even though c4 would also weaken those squares here. So in general, I would say that white is going to try to play either in the center here, but after this e file here. So this is where the action is going to be, on the king side basically, or in connection with e4. So yeah, if black doesn't go a5 here, he has a couple of different choices. I spoke to Adam. He said that after short castle, the best idea for white was probably to go for h3. When now if the bishop goes back to f5, then white has ideas with g4 and even with some attack after rook g1, which in fact looks quite dangerous for black. Again, if black takes on f3, we have the bishop pair ready and even can continue the attack with g4. I guess that the best move here is to move bishop f5, which is quite deep. I mean, you have to understand that a5 is not a good move. And now after a5, as we can see, white already has the idea of going a6, which would be quite unpleasant if short castle a6, b6. White has the idea of knight d4, when he will at least win the bishop pair because f5 is, knight takes f5 is an option, and also knight c6 is there. So this also looks very unpleasant for black. A6 would make a lot of sense here. And here was another amazing idea, which I saw, even the top choice by the computer, rook to a4. And white wants to follow it up by going queen to a1 and then build up like a battery here, like this. And the rook, in fact, can sometimes be even useful on the king side. For example, if short castle, queen a1, I could definitely imagine that white is going to play for some g4 sometime soon. And then this rook from a4 could definitely aid in the attack as well. So this was another very nice idea for white. Yeah, this is the idea of a4. Not sure what are the other logical possibilities except for a5, bishop f5, and short castle here. If you guys have any more ideas, definitely let me know in the comments section down below. But yeah, that's everything about this. Yeah, also black does have the move bishop f5 earlier, which might be in fact the best idea. If white goes a4 now, black can even stop that with a5 because now knight d4 doesn't do anything anymore. Bishop can just go back. So if bishop f5, white probably has to switch plans, go short castle, and then to try and prepare rook e1, bishop f1, e4 when we're gonna be sort of in a similar line. Usually this bishop is fianchetted on g2 in this sort of position. One line which I checked was bishop d6, rook e1, short castle, bishop f1, and now bishop e7 back. There are some details here, like that bishop e7 runs into e4, which doesn't work after bishop d6, but I'm not gonna go into them that much here, since bishop f5 is already kind of an, yeah, not so likely of a choice, I would argue. Yeah, let's go to the lines with bishop to f5, which is probably the big line apart from bishop g4. I would say that those two lines and also knight f6, e6 are probably the main choices here. So let's go to bishop f5. And here I saw a very interesting setup. So this is how white players have been playing for a very long time already, just fianchetting the bishop and just getting ready for a very slow game. d3, short castle, and now the move knight c3, which is sort of a new idea, which was popularized by Nicolas Teodoro. He has already many games here and always basically had pretty good positions. And the idea is that white wants to follow it up by going knight d2 and then e4, f4, and try to get some initiative on the king side going. The main line is usually knight bd2, but after bishop h7, black will go back anyway at some point. White usually goes rook e1 and then e4, but now those knights are sort of blocking the attack. And also the rook on e1 doesn't always want to be there. And this f pawn is also blocked. That's kind of the main problem. If black goes something like c6, e4, let's say a5, and if now white goes for e5, then this pawn is not like this is not nearly as fast. Even white could try and think about going back with the rook just to have knight e1 and f4. So white, as we can see, loses a lot of time here. So knight c3 was the idea which was popularized by Theodoro. I think also Vincent Keimer played it now recently. So this is definitely also quite some topical territory, theoretically speaking. c6 is, I think, the most logical move, but perhaps not even the best. Bishop h7 is also one idea. Just going out of this e4 idea prophylactically, but still e4 is the idea here. So Theodoro had a couple of games, and the point is if d takes e4, knight e5, white will win back the pawn on e4, because black cannot take, since after bishop e7 he will lose a lot of material. So this is how Theodoro's game went against Rudik Makarian, and in the end we have a very equalish endgame, almost a draw, but Theodoro even managed to win this endgame. The whole danger for black here is that the pawn on h6 is actually a long-term target. Often we see the white king even running to h5, trying to target that pawn, and white definitely keeps some winning chances here. So if bishop h7, e4 even works. c6, I said before, this is probably not the best, but I think I was mixing up things, so I think that c6 actually is quite a good move here, since now e4 doesn't work in one go, because this diagonal is already blocked, and now this knight e5 doesn't do anything anymore. Black can simply take, and there is no bishop takes b7. So here the idea is simply knight d2, and now black has to understand that bishop g6 is the right square for the bishop, which I think is impossible for any human to do, honestly, because everyone in their right mind will probably go back to h7, unless you are like super talented and super strong, because the bishop is just looks a bit more natural on h7 than on g6, at least in my opinion. The whole point is bishop g6 is better, since after e4 now the computer wants to go for c5. And now if e5, queen f3, black has to move bishop h5, which is the only move. Otherwise, black is in huge trouble, because knight d5 is threatened, and if d4, black is opening up this diagonal for the queen, which he also doesn't want to do. So after c5, in this case, it's the best choice for white to simply go knight e2 and try to use the positioning of the bishop on g6 with knight f4 to come on the next move. So if knight c6, knight f4, bishop h7, e d5, knight d5, take everything. And we're following a correspondence game here after queen g4. I think that white still has, black still has a couple of questions to answer here. There's a mating idea on g7. So knight d4 was how the correspondence game continued. Bishop d4, c d4, queen d4, and now rook c8. Interesting was that black didn't go for bishop f6, since this position with an exchange down actually looks quite dangerous for black. White is going to bring the knight to e3 and then just slowly try to mobilize his queenside pawns. Computer gives 0-0 here, but I think in practice this is quite unpleasant for black. So in the correspondence game, black went rook c8, and after queen d5, rook c2, knight c4. Black managed to make a draw, but it's definitely him who has to be a little bit careful, because white is still a pawn up for now, and the pawn on b7 is also hanging. So yeah, that's the line. Bishop g6 is the best for black, but I guess that most players are going to play bishop h7, and after e4, now we see that c5 doesn't work as well, because after ed, queen f3, black doesn't have to move bishop g6, and he's in some trouble. This was actually a real game. Tran Tuan Min, I think, played this with white, and also in that game, black went to h7. If black goes for d4, then I think everyone would be quite happy to go for this sort of King's Indian position. This attack, if it's rolling down the board, it can be very dangerous. f4 right away just doesn't work because of knight g4. That's important to note. So I really like the idea which was suggested by the computer, which is knight f4. And if knight c6, knight h3. Now the queen is activated, and white is going to prepare f4 followed by g4 with quite a dangerous attack for black, and also the bishop on h7 doesn't do much, and his counterplay on the queen side will be very, very slow in this case. Yeah, otherwise, if if black kind of keeps the tension here with moves like knight d7, as I said earlier, white will just slowly try to improve the position, like moves like queen e2 or f4 right away, and then followed by something like this, king h1, and at some point even g4 ideas are there, or to close off the position with e5, and then to continue attacking with g4 followed by f5 perhaps. So I think that was everything about this opening. I really like this idea with knight c3. That's definitely something to look into. And if you have this covered after bishop f5, if you have this idea, as well as Adam Kozak's idea after bishop g4, then I think you're pretty much covered to play this line with b3. The only other things, which I think I discussed in other videos as well, are those classical setups with e6 and also the move with c5. But there are definitely ways to generate ideas here with white. If you're curious about those lines as well, to make sort of a bigger video about them, definitely let me know in the comment section down below. And otherwise, we're gonna go to the next opening idea. All right, so the next opening idea we're gonna check out was played in the Austrian Bundesliga by Etienne Bacrot with the black pieces. And this is something in the Queen's Gambit exchange variation where he played an idea which I have never seen in my entire life before against the Serbian Grandmaster Ivanišević, who is also very strong and a very strong theoretician as well. And he was heavily surprised in the opening as well, as far as I could tell. So how we got there, dc4, the classical Queen's Gambit accepted, and white opted for e4. And now Bacrot went for the move c5, which is already sort of a surprise itself. Black has two main moves here, which first one is kind of the old move e5, and also knight f6 is quite popular. But more recently, people started playing c5 as well. So this sort of forces white to advance with d5. Knight f6, knight c3, and here Bacrot went for the move which was totally a surprise for me, the move b5. More recently, people have played the move e6, which is also sort of playable after bishop c4, e takes d5. E takes d5 is probably the best for white, but at least practically speaking, those positions tend to be not so easy for white to handle because black has quite an easy plan with bishop d6, short castle, and then knight d7, knight d5 to come. For now, also b5 is threatened, so white usually tries to avoid that by going a4. And in practice, this is also very much playable for black. But Bacrot went for the move b5, which now already white sort of has to find an only move to even try to play for an advantage, which is the move bishop f4. Which is not so easy to find as well. I mean, once you understand, the idea is that if black goes for b4 now, there's knight b5 when knight c7 is a huge threat. Otherwise, if the bishop is not here, then a6 would simply trap the knight. That's the whole idea. And here comes the absolutely shocking idea by Etienne Bacrot. I think there are only like 2 or 3 games played with this move, which is the move g5. And the idea is quite deep and quite interesting. First of all, what was played in the game, bishop g5, now b4 works, because now knight b5 doesn't do anything since there is no knight c7 threat, and now knight b5 simply would be losing due to a6. So that's the first idea. The second idea, if white doesn't take but goes back to g3, then queen a5 works pretty well for black. Why do you need g5 for that? That would be a good question to ask. The point is, if queen a5 immediately, then a4 works. And if b4 now, after knight b5, b3 check, there is bishop d2. If we have the same position with the inclusion of g5 and bishop g3, so let's go back here. Now queen a5 would work quite well, because after a4, b4, knight b5, there is b3 with check, and there is no bishop d2 back, and black is doing quite well here. So after g5, what are the options? Bishop g3, as I said, queen a5 is pretty much okay for black, so that sort of only leaves us with the move bishop takes g5. And now b4. This was Etienne's idea. Bishop takes f6, sort of forced. Otherwise, if the knight goes to a4, for example, then knight takes e4 simply works. So bishop f6, e takes f6, and white has to play a couple of only moves to have even some hopes of an advantage. The best move was also played by Ivanišević in the game, which is knight a4. There has been two predecessors, where knight b1 was played. One game here, Asobayeva against Galperin from 2022. And here black continued with knight d7, bishop takes e4, and bishop d6, which was quite a big mistake when it comes to positioning the pieces, since after bishop d6, knight d2, white was simply strategically, much strategically winning, you could even say. Just knight f3 is coming on the next move, short castle, and these pawns are blocked. Black is simply in quite a tough spot. So in this position, bishop g7 would still be okay. Black really needs to play for dynamics in general here with f5 to come when this is still sort of playable. But after knight b1, instead of knight d7, queen e7 is even stronger, with just the idea to take on e4, and if white protects that pawn somehow, you could throw one more in with f5. Again, black is totally playing for dynamics here, but here it works out pretty well. So knight e4 is the best move played by Ivanišević. And here there was another predecessor. So Bacrot went for queen e7. Another person played knight d7 before. This is maybe not as good, also perhaps playable. Bishop c4, and now bishop d6, followed by some early f5 just to break the center. This is playable, but queen e7 was Bacrot's idea, who I'm sure spent some time in this line trying to figure out what is the best try for black. So I would continue analyzing this. Queen e7, and now Ivanišević went for bishop takes e4, which is already an inaccuracy. And now the game continued, queen takes e4 check, queen e2 takes, knight takes e2, and it still looks like black's position is pretty ugly with these doubled pawns. The bishop has a nice square on c4, but also the knight on a4 is sort of out of play, you could say. Black continued with knight d7, and white now went for a3, which is already sort of quite a big inaccuracy, since now after knight e5, bishop b5 check, king d8, all these pieces were sort of misplaced. Rook b8 came on the next move, and now this bishop is already sort of trapped even, because you also don't want to go to c6, since black could just take and then pick up the pawn on c6. So the game continued, f e5, rook b5, short castle, f takes e5, rook f7, rook a5, and now we also see that the knight on a4 is in quite a lot of danger to get trapped. Black is already sort of winning here, a b4, c b4, b3, bishop d7, and Bacrot managed to win a very nice game in this, in their encounter. So that was this. Here, instead of a3, short castle would have still been a bit better in this position, but now king d8 was the top computer move. Also knight e5 I think immediately was fine, but king d8 is just prophylactically stepping out of bishop b5, and on the next move knight e5 or knight b6 even in some cases could come, when at least objectively but also practically I think that black already has some good chances here, especially with this nice control along the dark squares. The critical move in this position after queen e7 is definitely queen c2. The line continues f5, long castle, b3, a takes b3, c takes b3, and now queen d2. This is all what black has to find. Not entirely logical why you should put the queen to d2 and not to c3. I thought this is a bit more logical. But the main idea is that after queen c3 now there's bishop h6 with check, king b1, queen takes e4 check. And the line continues like this. In the end, of course, it's some move repetition. That's how it went. d6 check, king b7, take on c8, queen takes h6, and now black has to repeat moves. Yeah, quite a nice finish to that line. Queen e2 is the best move. Queen takes b3 also. Definitely an option for white to consider. Now bishop h6 check, king b1 and short castle leads to just a typical, just a complete mess. But in the long run, again, this bishop can be very, very powerful if it goes back to g7 in combination with the rook coming to the b file. This could definitely also go very, very wrong for white. So the best line goes queen d2, now f takes e4 since queen e4 doesn't work because of rook e1. F takes e4, d6, queen e6, knight takes e5, bishop h6, and now we reach an endgame where white is definitely a little bit better, so black has to try to play for a draw, I would say, in this position. White could also repeat moves, rook c1, knight d7, knight e2, knight f6, and yeah, this is how it ended. Material is equal, if I'm counting correctly, but white's king is more active. The pawn on d6 is also quite annoying for black. And the pawn on b3 could also be a target. The knight could come to d4 later on as well. So this is definitely the critical line for white, but I doubt that anyone will find here, at least if they're not prepared. So that's a critical line, but definitely something also black can live with. I mean, Bacrot probably was also ready to enter that line and then just trying to hold a draw in the end. So, yeah, bishop f4 was the only move here, but I also wanted to point out the move e5, which was, I think, by number of games is played even more often. And yeah, if black has to retreat the knight now, of course, many things went wrong, but the idea is to counterattack the white's knight on c3 with b4. E takes f6, b takes c3, b takes c3. White cannot recapture anything, like if they try to take on g7 first, then bishop g7, and they cannot even take on c3 anymore because there's bishop c3. So b takes c3, and now e takes f6, bishop takes c4, bishop d6, and all of a sudden we got some Caro-Kann type of structure with this very modern line. Let me just put it up on the board. I'm referring to this exact line here, where black also does have the double pawns here. White has a better pawn structure, but black has has some options to play on the king side later on, since he has more pawns there, which could help with the attack. So this structure is quite similar. And here on top of that, white's pawn is already blockaded here. So black has set up a nice blockade along the dark squares. And Bacrot also even had a game here in 2023 against Yakuboev, who played knight e2, which is not the best move. And Bacrot actually had a better position quite soon. Short castle, bishop d3, knight d7, queen c2, g6, c4, knight e5. When black is already quite a lot better. White's pieces are a little bit awkward. At some point, black could definitely think about taking this bishop on d3. And again, we see this very nice blockade. The bishop on d6 is a very strong piece as well. The best move after bishop d6 is perhaps queen e2 check, when black could go for the endgame with queen e7, but I also saw that king f8 is an option, which black would follow it up by h5, then bishop g4. When the king is actually not really unsafe on f8, it could also later just go to g7 after g6. And other than that, black will of course try to put the knight to e5 as well. Even after h3, knight d7 works, because taking on g4 seems quite dangerous, opening up the h-file. So yeah, that's everything in this line. I think quite interesting to add to your repertoire if you're already playing the Queen's Gambit accepted, or if you're trying to surprise your opponent who only goes for e4. Of course, there are the other moves, e3 and knight f3 to take care as well. But I think that this line with c5 is interesting, especially with b5, but also this line with e6 can definitely be investigated. So let's go to the next idea. So the next opening idea was played in the Austrian Bundesliga as well, between my good friend Dominik Horvath, Austrian Grandmaster, and Nguyen Taiwan from the Czech Republic. Both young and talented players. Nguyen Taiwan, of course, on the absolutely highest level, has just won the Tata Steel B group and will be playing in the Tata Steel A group next year. So a very, very strong player who has had, in specific, very good results over the last couple of months, showing very nice preparation also in general. So in this game, Horvath went for e4 and Nguyen went for c6, which, as far as I know, he doesn't do as much, but he showed quite an interesting idea in the Caro-Kann, as we will see. So Dominik went for the classical main line with knight d2, knight takes e4, and Nguyen went for the modern main line with knight f6, which we have just seen an analogy in the chapter before about this exact structure. Of course, the main line knight f5, bishop f5 is also completely playable, but in recent times, black has gone for knight f6, since it also offers quite a lot of nice dynamical opportunities for black to try and play for a win. c3, bishop d6, bishop d3, short castle, queen c2. We're following the absolute main line. And here Nguyen went for sort of the old move, which is g6. Which, yeah, surprised me quite a lot when I was watching this game live, since this line has always kind of counted as being very dangerous, since black is running into h4, h5, when then this pawn chain could come under fire, and the king is often quite vulnerable on the king side. Therefore, the more modern move in this line has been to play h5 either immediately or with rook e8 first. This is kind of how the main line discussions are going now. In this line, there is also this move h6, which is also quite interesting. So there are a couple of ideas for black how to handle this position, but I really liked Nguyen's approach by going g6, since it will probably surprise many opponents, since no one really plays this line anymore. Dominik went for h4, which seems a little bit early for me, and Nguyen also managed to just get a pretty good position quite soon. Knight e2 immediately seems a little bit more flexible after g6. After knight e2, black again has a couple of ideas. Jordan van Foreest played the move knight a6, which seemed pretty interesting. The idea is just to regroup the knight to c7 and then perhaps to e6. The only problem here is that after h4, h5, now bishop takes g6, then black has to be okay with the draw. That's how it is, since now white can repeat moves. Also, white doesn't have much more than that, so this would just be a draw. I think that Jordan's game continued short castle. Yeah, that was it. Knight c7, c4, knight e6, bishop e3, f5, and now he sort of got everything he wanted, especially if white already castled short, since now the black king will at least not get under any fire. And Jordan even had a better position quite soon. Queen e2, queen f6, and white already has to worry about f4 coming in sometime soon. So knight a6 is definitely one try in this position, but yeah, h4 is probably critical, not short castle like in Jordan's game. h4, h5, and now, as we said, bishop g6 is a draw, but other moves are yeah, perhaps not that much of a problem, even though this line which I checked here is also definitely something to take care of here if you want to play that. Bishop h6, rook e8. This was one correspondence game, long castle, and white will try to set up f3 and g4, and things will just completely escalate basically. Long castle, king h7, bishop d2 back, knight c7, f3, king h8, c4, b5, c5, bishop f8, and the position is just a total mess. This is how the correspondence game went on. So black is trying everything he can to close the lines, and here after knight g3 I ended my analysis. It looks quite dangerous for black, I'm gonna be honest, but white also needs to know quite a lot here to reach all of this, and it's certainly a possible try to go there. So knight a6 is one option, but I haven't even said my favorite option, which is probably king g7, which looks like quite a nice prophylactic idea, since now whenever white goes h4, you're just going to go h5, and there will not even be an option to get a draw with bishop g6. So the best line, I think, continued with bishop e3. Rook e8, and then after long castle, knight a6, and it will probably lead to something similar as we saw earlier. And after h4, black will always try to go h5, try to keep the lines closed, and then black will try to attack on his own sometime soon with bishop e6. Often b5 is the idea, followed by b4, or just trying to break white's structure. So these are all possible ideas. I also want to mention the move c5, which aims to immediately play in the center, which is also quite interesting. I think this has also been played by Jordan van Foreest. So many different ideas here after h4, after knight e2 in this position. Dominic went for h4 immediately. Now h5 was played in the game. Bishop e3, by the way, if bishop g6 now, that doesn't even work because black has the move queen e8 check. If the bishop goes back, then f5 wins the piece, and if he goes for something like knight e2, now black can just take, and yeah, the pawn on g6 is protected, so black is simply a piece up. So Dominic went for bishop e3 in that game, king g7, and now knight f3, and here black already took over, since the knight on f3 is I would say, just misplaced in the long run. Knight e2 would be sort of the similar way to proceed, when black again could play something like knight a6 or just rook e8 first, with very typical play. White will try to castle long and attack on the king side, as we saw earlier, and black will try to do the same on the queen side later. So Dominic went knight f3, rook e8, long castle, and now knight a6, and now white simply doesn't have any counterplay with f3 and g4, so the knight is just misplaced here, and black managed to win quite a nice game. King e1, bishop e6, that's how it continued, and just one plan here, as I said earlier, a5, b5 is very typical for black, a very typical way for black to advance, and black had an overwhelming advantage in that game. So yeah, queen c2, g6, definitely something to add to your repertoire if you're playing that line of the Caro-Kann. So let's go to the next idea. Yeah, so the next opening idea is something from Nihal Sarin, who played it in a tournament in, I'm gonna embarrass myself. I think it was in Kazakhstan. It was definitely an open tournament, which in the end he won. I think it was in Kazakhstan. It was against Sanan Syugerov in round 7. That's what it says here for me. But it was a very strong tournament as I said, I believe it was in Kazakhstan. So Nihal was white, he played e4, c5, knight f3, d6, and now he went for knight c3, knight f6, and bishop b5 check. So in this chapter, we're going to have a look at kind of what Nihal Sarin has been doing against the Najdorf, or at least against players who want to play the Najdorf. And this is one system he has been playing quite a lot, and it has been under my radar for some time, but now I took the time to try and fully understand what white is trying to achieve with this bishop sortie in the opening. So after bishop d5 check, almost everyone plays the move bishop d7. Knight d7 would be a little bit misplaced here. Then I guess white could just continue with castle, and if a6, there's even the idea to sometimes go back. Also, the move d4 would be possible. After c takes d4, both knight takes d4 or queen takes d4 are options, and if a6, I think this is now kind of the line which black is trying to avoid. I think this is kind of the critical approach here. But in general, no one really plays knight bd7. The same can be said about knight c6, since now white could even try to ruin black's pawn structure with bishop takes c6, or just continue with short castle. Also d4 is an option. So this is really not what Najdorf players want to do in general. They don't really want to have the knight on c6 in most cases. So bishop d7 is what most players do, and now Nihal's idea is to go queen e2. In that game against Sanan Syugirov, he went for the move e6. There are a couple of options here. First of all, what is the idea of queen e2? The idea in general is if black takes the bishop on b5, then queen takes b5 will come. Even this is sort of playable for black, but at least white can try to surprise black in this position. Queen d7, e5, this is how my analysis went. D takes e5, queen takes c5, knight c6, knight takes e5, queen e6. f4, sort of a strange line here. Knight d7, queen c4, knight e5, queen e6. Now black has to do this intermediate move, knight e3 check. Otherwise, if he takes, his pawn structure will be bad, and white is still fully intact. So this is the whole idea, to try and ruin white's pawn structure as well. And this position is around equal. I still saw this move rook b1 being suggested by Stockfish, where I really like the idea that white wants to push b4 and b5. For example, g6 was, I think, probably the most logical move in this position, but white was already quite a lot better after the move b4 followed by b5. So there is still definitely a lot of play in this position. Also, what I forgot to mention, I think white is one pawn up, which I didn't even fully understand in this position. So that's also something to be happy about. So yeah, that's about bishop takes b5. Another thing which you could ask, what is actually the idea after a6? Now the whole idea is that if you compare it to bishop takes d7, when black would probably also take with the queen or with the knight, then we got a better version, since the queen is already quite nicely placed on a2, and black sort of wasted a move on a6, which is not a useless move, but not as useful as queen e2. After bishop d7, knight d7, short castle, e6, we will reach something very similar to the game, where black also has played this move a6, which is not always as useful. Yeah, before we head to the main line, there's also the move g6, which is arguably the most concrete or even best continuation for black. There have been two games by Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, one of them even against Nihal Sarin, and the idea is again to continue with e5, d takes e5, and now queen takes e5. And objectively, this is nothing much, but at least practically speaking, it puts black in a position where he has to already think a little bit, because the pawn on c5 is hanging, and in fact, black's option here is to sacrifice the pawn with the move knight c6. Queen takes e5, and now black has a couple of options. Vachier played in one game e6, in one game a6. After a6, this was against Nihal Sarin, bishop c6, queen e3, bishop g7, short castle. Black definitely has enough compensation for the sacrificed pawn, but it's just a playable position. Like white is also sort of has a safety net, since he is a pawn up. Nothing much should go wrong. So the game continued, knight d5, take, d4, and he went for long castle, which is very interesting. The game later on ended in a draw. Also, short castle would be of course possible. Again, black has for sure enough compensation with this strong bishop pair, but nothing much more than that. And also black has to find all of that to even reach so far. E6 was also one try by Vashila Graf against Sindarov. Now queen c4, a6, bishop c6, bishop c6, and queen e2 back. We got sort of a similar position like earlier. Even after a6, which was played here against Nihal Sarin, white even has the option to not give up the bishop, but to retreat somewhere to c4 or to e2, for example. So yeah, that's about g6. e6 was played by Sanan Sugarov in their game. Now bishop takes d7 was Nihal's idea. Knight takes d7. If queen takes d7, in general, white wants to proceed with d4. For example, here d4, cd4, knight d4, knight c6, bishop e3, when white will probably continue with long castle, and the queen is also a little bit misplaced on this d file, since it will be looking right into the rook's scope on d1. So knight takes d7 is again the main move, and now the engine is showing that nothing much is happening here, but I really liked how Nihal approached the position, and I think that there's definitely some practical value in how he played, and I believe that many black players will struggle similarly as Sugarov did in his game against Nihal, which we're going to see now. So Nihal just continued with d3, bishop e7, a4. It looks like absolutely nothing is happening, but Nihal, in fact, had a very nice plan, which we will see soon. Rook c8, short castle, and now he started by going knight e1. And this idea has reminded me quite a lot of one idea in the Moscow variation, which was featured in one of my earlier opening videos. And the idea in general is that white wants to just start pushing his pawns on the king side. f4, g4, g5. And if white manages to do all of that, which Nihal, in fact, did manage in the game, then it can become very dangerous for black. Knight e5 was the move played in the game. f4, knight c6, g4, knight d7, king h1, a6, queen g2. And black is sort of lacking an active plan here. So that was the move which Sugarov played, king h8. And now Nihal already had quite a nice choice between many moves. He could just go for knight f3 and then later on followed up by g5, possibly f5, and white is already much better, in fact. Nihal played rook f3, which is also a very nice idea. He wants to put the rook to h3, where it will also aid the attack. So this is how the game went, and Nihal in the end won a very nice attacking game. The best option after knight e1 for black is to immediately play in the center with d5, with the idea that after f4, knight b8, g4, if white continues the same, then c4 generates just enough counterplay for black. Even this is still completely playable for black, for white as well, but this is black's best answer. There was also the option to go g4, which might be a bit more accurate, trying to get g5 immediately, knight e8, f4, knight c6, and now queen g2. We got sort of a similar position like earlier. Black has maybe a little bit of a better version than in the game, but still I really like white's attacking chances on the king side in this position as well. So yeah, that was this idea with queen e2. What I said earlier, what reminded me in the Moscow of this whole idea, this was this line, which was featured, I think, in a video of December, which I made. So that was the idea here, when white also followed it up by g4 and g5. Sort of a similar position, just that the light squared bishops have been traded, like if we compare it to this position. But I really liked how Nihal handled this, and I can definitely imagine that this could be tried more often with the white pieces as well. So let's have a look at the next idea. So the next and also the final opening idea was played in the Women's World Championship match in round number 1. And I thought I definitely want to include at least one game from the match which is currently ongoing, since there have been many interesting opening ideas being played there as well. Especially the interesting fact is, so this game was with Wenjun having the white pieces and Tan Chongyi with black, is that Tan opted for, at least until now, opted only for the Sicilian, and in most of the games she went for the e6 Sicilian. In the early games, Wenjun went for sort of some anti-Sicilians. In that game we're going to have a look at, she did choose sort of a rare line, and in her second white game she went for the move c4, which is also interesting. After that, yeah, d4, cd4, knight d4, knight f6 was played in that game. After that game, Tan Chongyi also went for the Khan Sicilian, which surprised many people, including myself. But in that game, Tan Chongyi went for knight f6, and Wenjun played the move bishop d3, which I find very, very interesting, and is not even a move which you can play like only once, but this is something you can play like on a regular basis. It's actually a very, very serious line for white. It was firstly mentioned, I believe, by Nicolaus Ntierlis in one of his tweets. Definitely check them out if you haven't. He's a very strong correspondence player and fantastic book author who is often just tweeting about different opening ideas. And he's also published a book for white opening repertoire with e4. It's called Reimagining e4, which is a great book. I recently purchased it, so definitely check it out if you're also looking for some fresh and interesting directions with the white pieces in 1e4. So bishop d3, what exactly is the idea? The idea is that white doesn't want to commit the knight to c3 just yet. And if black goes knight c6, which happened in the game, then the point is white wants to take, ruining black's pawn structure, perhaps. After bishop d3, there are not really that many other options. I saw that e5 has been played a little bit, sometimes by some players, but white has many different options. Knight e2, knight f3, knight b3. And in general, if black plays the e6 Sicilian, he probably doesn't want to have this sort of structure as well. So knight c6 is by far the main move. Knight takes e6, and Tan Chong-yi went for b takes e6. I always thought that d takes e6 might be a little bit of a more solid option for black. But it's also sort of annoying for black to face, because after short castle, e5, knight d2, white is always pushing a little bit. The reason for that is that the knight on f6 is a much worse of a piece than white's knight, which will come to c4, attacking the pawn on e5. So in general, what white will want to do is to put the knight to c4, then perhaps push a4 and a5, go bishop e3. Queen will move somewhere, put a rook on the d file, and white's play in general is just very, very easy in this position. So Tan Chong-yi went b takes e6, and now bishop f4 is the whole idea. So white wants to develop this knight to d2, and firstly to develop the bishop to f4. There is a similar idea in the Taimanov. In fact, like there is this bishop f4 move here as well, with sometimes similar ideas. Like even there are some move orders. If black goes knight f6 here, you could take here as well, and after bishop d3 we're back here. But after bishop f4 here in the Taimanov move order, black also has the move d6, which is probably the most serious continuation. But it's definitely interesting, if you like those bishop f4 lines, to also check them in the Taimanov, because they're also quite topical and interesting there. So the game continued, b takes e6, bishop f4, d5, knight d2, g6, and until here it's still sort of well-known territory. There have been quite a lot of top-level games, and most of them have continued with the move c3, and now either bishop g7, or even sometimes they have played the move bishop e7, but bishop g7 has been mostly played, and white also sort of keeps an edge here. At least it's definitely playable. But the best continuation for black is probably knight h5, which was surely also covered in both of their preparations. There has been one predecessor, Cuculus against Lupulescu, and it continued like this: bishop e3, bishop d6, and now the bishop has managed to reach this nice d6 square. Castle, rook e1, e5, when I think that black has pretty active counter chances in the center. So I can understand why Wenjun's team tried to look for something else, and they, I would say, successfully did by finding the move bishop g5. So white is moving the bishop again, and for the moment she's threatening the move e5, so black has to do something about that. She included h6 first, Tan Chong-yi, bishop h4, and now she went for bishop e7. And I would say that the bishop on h4 now, like, I mean, first of all, I need to mention that it makes a lot of sense also to move the bishop twice, since black has already committed himself to this move g6, which does weaken the dark squares as well. After bishop h4, Tan Chong-yi went for bishop e7, short castle, and a5. And white continued with queen e2, short castle, rook a1, knight d7, and white managed to get a slight edge, but it's not easy to really get something out of this, I really have to say. Wenjun played very logical. She took on e7, bishop g3 would have also been an option, but bishop e7, queen e7, and now she went for c4, which immediately sort of lets black equalize with knight e5. That's how the game continued then, and just lots of material exchanged, and the game ended in a draw pretty fast. Instead of all of this, white could have tried the move knight f3 and just played a little bit more slow. Knight c5 now doesn't really work because of the queen e3, knight takes d3, c takes d3 is what white has the option to do now. And white is strategically basically winning here because those dark squares are just super weak and the bishop is not doing anything. So knight c5 would be a terrible mistake. King g7, one example, rook fe1, and it's just a game. White will at some point try to get c4, but prepared a little bit, like you could try and throw in h4 at some point. And white probably has the slightly better chances here, just because the bishop was also still not fully in the game here. Yeah, that was bishop e7 in that position. I also saw that bishop d6 is one option suggested by the computer. Probably the best move, objectively speaking, but also not an easy call to make because it's always running into this e5, at least at some point. Black always has to be careful about this. And here there are a couple of options. I checked short castle, and now rook e1 was interesting, sort of forcing black to go e5, when after ed, cd, c4, it will be quite complicated. Black's center is under a lot of fire for now, so he might even have to sacrifice some material to keep the initiative going. So that's one interesting line. Another more solid alternative is to go f4, when after d e4, knight e4, bishop e7, if white takes everything, and b3. It's probably very, very close to a draw, but still white seems to me like he has the slightly better chances just because of her better pawn structure compared to black's, and the bishop is still not doing much on c8. So yeah, that was one of the interesting ideas from the Women's World Championship as well. Bishop d3 is something very interesting, which has been quite topical for a long time, but I also wanted to cover it on this channel as well. So guys, that was it for this series, series of the opening ideas. It's been a long time since I made it. It was a lot of work as usual to collect all of those ideas and also to analyze them properly to be able to show them to you. So if you enjoyed this video, I think it was quite a long one. Let me know in the comments definitely, and like the video. It would really help out the channel's reach. And yeah, I hope you found value in today's video, and I'm gonna see you guys soon.